Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of K9s Talking Sense. So, in this episode, you got to see this guest interview me in a previous episode. So now it's my turn to turn around and interview Steve Antommarchi. So I know I got it pretty close to right. It's your last name. But Steve, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking your time to come on here and answer my questions this time.
Yeah, how the turntables, as Michael Scott said, right?
Oh, how the turntables have turned.
Yeah, something. Well, yeah, exactly. I feel much more comfortable being on your end interviewing than being the one being interviewed. But you did say my last name right. Antommarchi is
Perfect.
That's the way you say it. So yes,
Cool.
Thank you for having me, man.
Absolutely. So let's dive into you and your background. So tell us a little bit about you, how you got to where you're at today, and describe that journey for those watching and listening.
Yeah, man. It's definitely a journey, and I think that's a good way to say it because we all have our story, right? And not crazy unique to our industry, but my story definitely starts on 9/11. As a volunteer fireman at that time, went with my local engine from New Jersey over to New York and spent a couple days over there. And I was actually pretty young at the time. I'm maybe 17 years old, right? So still trying to figure out what I want to do for the rest of my life. And then to be in the middle of such a tragedy really shaped my career. So I always point back to that. And quite frankly, that was the first time I ever saw a working dog work. So a couple of days later, of course, the search and rescue dogs show up. And I got to see something that I always tell people was like really, really moving in my life, which was seeing a dog not only working, but working through injury. And that it was like a lab. The lab had, I guess, had cut itself through some of the uneven surface. Some of the sharp objects, as you can imagine, were everywhere. So the lab had cut itself kind of in probably the rib area, I would say. And the handler must have had pretty significant medical background because he put the dog to its side. He used some iodine, cleaned it out, and it was small enough where he felt comfortable suturing it right there and leaving, I guess, a little bit open. And he sutured the dog right there, probably 20 feet from me. And then the dog got back up and they started working again. And for me, that was it, man. I was like, the first conversation I ever had with God right there. Like, if I get to do something that meaningful and that cool, please choose me. I want to do something that cool. And then I get an opportunity, fast forward 15 years, become a police officer, get an opportunity to work in the private sector, have some awesome mentors kind of put me, take who I was at that time, which was a very cocky young man who thought he knew everything, and really did a great job of molding me into someone who was a student and a forever learner. And yeah, man, now I'm the founder of Next Level K9 Texas. We focus on a lot of canine research within the police community. That's primarily our focus. We have our local groups that see us, every week, and we kind of open that up to the North Texas area. But yeah, I've worked probably 14 dogs in my career. Because I've always worked a bomb dog and a narcotics dog throughout my career. That's both a blessing and a curse, of course, as you know. It's a lot of work there. But those are I kind of cut my teeth in the explosive detection side first and saw the nuance there and really fell in love with the science and just found myself doing scientific research with, some of the universities that are known to do canine scientific research.
That's a lot of dogs. I mean, you've definitely to have 14 dogs over the span of how many years have you been working a dog?
About 15 years. Yeah.
Okay. So like you said, 2 at a time. So that's, like I said, it gets you hands on a lot of dogs. And for you in a fairly short period of time, how did you get to that point with going with, let's say the average typical canine handler has a dog. They work it, let's just say 6 years, and then they get another one. Now you had 2 at the same time, roughly.
Yeah.
Is that with just a part of being with an agency with more flexibility? How does that come around?
Yeah. So all of my narcotics dogs were dual purpose dogs. So I've only actually worked 4 of those dogs. The rest were bomb dogs that I worked for both the police side and the civilian side. And
Gotcha.
that's where those numbers go up. So really, I would say I've worked 4 professional dogs in my career, a narcotics patrol dog, and including the private sector stuff, it just gets quite high. I was naming
Yeah.
them yesterday. I was like, holy crap, I've worked a lot of dogs in my life. And
Well, that's
unfortunately, they get good and then they die on you. So you have a wall full of their, a reminder of what you learn from each one of those dogs.
for sure. Well, I mean, how you reach the point of now instructing and in teaching and training, it's by getting your hands dirty with a number of dogs, is what molds you and helps you relate. For me, um, one of the things that was a blessing and a curse was the fact that in the beginning it was kind of a curse going from military to having a business to law enforcement, then contracting, so I was always moving location to location, but every time I changed jobs or those careers, it gave me new dogs to work, new experiences, and then now fast forward, I can take those past experiences and be understanding and relate to others in these different types of genres, from contracting, military, law enforcement, and so forth. So even though I kind of never did one for 20 years, I like you're mentioning with the dog stuff, I'm trying to make a correlation for listeners to understand sometimes that path, though you want that straight line, sometimes having multiple opportunities in these different professional genres can be a bonus for you, even though in the beginning it doesn't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah, I absolutely value my time with those 4 core dogs that I've built my career around on the police side. But I can make the argument that I've learned a lot more about the other dogs that I had to work because I had less time with them and I had to do, a job that's relatively serious, right? You're looking for explosives you can afford to miss. And then that came really evident when having to respond to, some tragedies even locally. I don't know if you remember back in 2015, I think it was, when the Dallas 5 officers got killed
Yes.
downtown. So they were killed downtown, and then during the negotiations, that guy was saying that he had hidden IEDs all over downtown. So after he gets neutralized, it's our responsibility now to clear all of downtown Dallas to make it safe, so that CID and everybody else can start processing the scene. And I tell this story for anyone who's been to any of my classes. This is where I love talking about my failures because I've learned so much about my failures. And although I would say I was very much involved in training the right way and training for operational success, one of the things I didn't train for was neutralizing my bomb dog to human blood.
Mm.
And that was tough for me because, you're given this responsibility to clear a certain area. And my dog spent a lot of time on that novel odor. He spent more time than I'd like. And, going back, what could I do? Right. I look at, okay, what could I have done differently so that I can have a better result in the future? Because you have guys backing you up that have no background in dogs whatsoever. Their job is to back you up. Little fun fact about that situation: at the time of our deployment, there were still 2 people outstanding that we were very interested in, that we thought were involved. So the guys that were with me are essentially SWAT members who've never been around a dog. And, are they going to be looking at what you do? Of course they are. And one of the things that came up was, hey, your dog spent a lot of time around that blood. Do we need to be worried about that? And I'm like, no, I do, because it's a training issue. But yeah, got multiple opportunities to deploy in other unfortunate tragedies when you're dealing with the bomb dog, where I can say that we've done a great job of doing our best we can to neutralize to that human odor, or that human blood odor, which is tough. I don't know if you've ever had an experience with that, but that was a tough one for me.
Yeah, and I kind of want to stay there for a second with you. Let's talk about how that went down for you. Um, so take us from the beginning. Obviously, I'm assuming the you got called or
Hmm.
notified. Obviously, this is a active shooter situation. We need you to respond to this area and kind of give everybody watching and listening like the step by step
Sure.
experience that you went through.
So of course it happened at the end of like a 12-hour shift, right? So I'm just finishing my shift. I get a call on my way home. Uh, an ATF calls me, and a guy that I trained with for a while, and he's like, "Hey, are you aware of what's happening downtown Dallas?" And at that time, it's essentially a SWAT call, right? That we know that there was still one or multiple outstanding. So I didn't know of course, the small details, but then it's all over the news. It's national news at this point. Everyone knows about it. Everyone's talking about it. I'm on my way home, um, and I was working my narcotics patrol dog at the time. My bomb dog, who I had just certified the day before, I'm actually on my way home to go pick up that dog so that I can go back to downtown Dallas and take care of what I need to take care of. And unique situation. Typically, I have a split kennel where I always have both dogs with me. In that situation, that particular car didn't have a split kennel. It was kind of, I think my car was down at that time, so it was just a spare car. So I only could take one dog, and that's why I have to go back. So anyway, I get back, and you know everybody's perception on the law enforcement side is this is absolutely a SWAT deal at this moment, not a narcotics or a bomb dog situation. So when I get home and I start packing up my stuff and I grab everything, my wife looks at me and she's like, "Where are you going?" And I'm just like, they believe that there's IEDs all over downtown. So we have that moment. We have a quick prayer, and she's like, "Hey, I don't want you to go, but I know that this is what you trained for. This is part of the process." So grab all my stuff, grab all my gear. I'm thinking everything my mentors ever talked to me about, making sure I keep dryer sheets with me and be mindful of static electricity, and all those things are running through my head. So what do? I pick up the phone and I call one of my mentors, Bob Suarez, and Bob's like, "Hey, man, you've trained for this. You're going to be fine. Like, this is the call that you've been waiting for your career. Go do a good job." Try to put me at ease, of course. So I mentioned that when I got down there, I was assigned a SWAT team. Well, because I'm not thinking right. I'm thinking, all right, I have these dryer sheets. I have to really rub everybody down with these dryer sheets. So the conversation was like, "Hey, my name is Steve. This is my dog Verdi." As I'm wiping them down without their consent, which was a pretty funny moment, right? And none of the guys ever said anything. They were just like, "I guess this is part of the process, right?" But here are these big old SWAT dudes, right? And I'm rubbing them down with these dryer sheets to try to minimize static electricity. And no one even brings it up until after the deployment. They're like, "Hey, you want to run us why, like, tell us why you did that?" And I'm cracking up. I'm like, "Why didn't anybody say anything?" Here I am. I'm in my own head thinking I have to make this a priority. Looking at everybody's uniform and their gear to make sure that it's going to be compatible for the operational success and safety. Um, I meet my guys, and then the hard truth comes, which is we have about 25 bomb teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at that time, and only 3 were there: myself and 2 other ATF agent dogs. And I couldn't tell you exactly why. I know there was more red tape than you would hope to see in a situation like that. Some people could not get the okay to come down and help us. So we felt like we were on an island, man, to be quite frank. So we're trying to clear city blocks in downtown Dallas. It's quiet. You can hear a pin drop. Very awkward. And I remember trying to gather as much intel as possible. And I'm speaking to some Dallas officers who are holding perimeter, who are actually involved in a firefight. And they're like, "Hey, I saw this guy get shot. I returned fire." I'm like, "Wait a second. You were involved in this thing and you're holding perimeter?" This is like 10 hours later, by the way. So, I mean, it was tough. Even back then, kind of a shortage of police officers. So, getting numbers there was a problem for really any agency. But anyway, we're doing our thing, and of course, we're given 3 blocks to kind of focus on where everything happened, and we come up with a plan. We're going to come back every 45 minutes to an hour. We're going to go radio silent. We're going to have our teams with us, and we're going to go to work. And I've trained with these guys, so I'm thankful for the phone call, to know that they had enough trust in me to do my job and the dog's ability to do the job operationally. And that's important. I think that gave me confidence, but it also scared the crap out of me, because you don't want to be the guy to miss something. This is as real as it's going to get, right? You have 5 officers confirmed killed. very good intel. At that moment, we actually had video of when the suspect pulled into park. You had another vehicle parked just one spot from them. There was a male and female in that vehicle, and the female had a backpack on her. And they had a quick conversation, and they went different ways. Now we know it was completely random, but we were convinced that that's where the IEDs were. Thus, we took it as serious as we could. So, you're going to do everything you can to gather as much intel before actually putting your dog's paws, on the ground. You want to make sure that you understand the environment. You want to start thinking about, if I'm a bad guy, where am I going to put IEDs? Where would people funnel in? This guy obviously had this thought out, so we spent some time planning, and then we did our thing. We broke up into our 3 units. We came back. We discussed what we saw, what we cleared, what we didn't. We had an exterior kind of command post and an interior command post. So we just go back to the interior and talk about what we saw, make sure guys were hydrated and that the dog was hydrated, give him a break. So we had good reps from every single time the dog was out there. And then I'm confronted with obviously a large pool of blood where one of the officers got shot and unfortunately killed. And it was tough, man, because you compartmentalize everything as much as you can. So at the time of the deployment, I don't think that it bothered me as much as it did afterwards when I had time to think about it. Because I'm like, damn, I could have done better there. But my dog had never been exposed to that. Spent quite a bit of time there. There was police equipment and other things that were kind of thrown in that area. And eventually we got through that and continued to search different areas. And then we went to kind of like a 7-Eleven convenience store that got shot up pretty good. And in that area, there was glass and all kinds of stuff. So I'm like, okay, how do I clear this safely? I don't have booties on my dog. Is this safe to do? What should I do here? Things that I didn't even think about in training. So another situation, after dealing with the blood, now I'm in another situation where there's shards of glass everywhere. Ironically, the 7-Eleven, attendant is still behind the cashier waiting for customers where that's not going to have any. And my dog takes me to the back and, we get to a door and my dog starts to really show a lot of interest. And the attendant there at the 7-Eleven says, "Hey, I think there's people down there." And I'm like, okay, this is not a dual purpose narcotics dog looking for human odor. This is a bomb dog. So now the SWAT team that's assigned to me has to go downstairs. It was like a basement area where there was about 20 people down there that were just hiding for cover. I told you this was 10 hours later. Because of their location. There was no cell phone service. They were scared to come out. And now they're having to kind of cycle through making sure these people are safe and that none of these people are the people we're looking for. So, after that happens, we clear that area for IEDs or explosives. And then we get back to work, man. And we did this for about 12 hours on a rotation, on for 45 minutes to an hour, and then off for about a half hour, and then went back and forth for about 12 hours. And it was tough not finding anything because, that's your greatest fear. I told you my 9/11 story. I get home and my wife, of course, can't sleep. And when I get home, like the first thing I see on the TV is a video of me working my dog. And on the bottom banner says the worst tragedy, worst loss of police lives since 9/11 or something like to that effect. And it like hit me. I was like, well, God answered my my prayers. He gave me an opportunity to not only work a dog, but to respond to a tragedy. And I'm happy to say that there was no IEDs found. Now at his location where he lived, he did have IEDs. So our general consensus was that he just hadn't prepped it enough, didn't feel comfortable enough with his knowledge to actually deploy the IEDs. But he had all the book readings, all the FBI basically had told us that he was ready to do it, just for whatever reason did not.
So let's go into on that deployment. You brought the blood part. but because this is the closest thing I would say a law enforcement canine handler would have to what a military combat veteran has when they worked in Iraq or Afghanistan. Um, and just, the examples from the military side of it was the first couple of years was a lot of lessons learned
Hmm.
of, oh, well, that doesn't make sense for this kind of theater or this kind of deployment. The training that they had employed prior to that, the style of deploying a dog prior to that was all what I would say the typical bomb dog world of training, which was walk backwards, present, and all these things that didn't make sense in an environment like that. You needed to be off leash, you needed to have distance, all these different things that later on became commonplace, but at that time was not. So for you in a call like that, did you work on leash? Did you work off leash? What were some of the things that you were like, wow, I wish I had done something in training to prepare me for this? And along that same line that what you went through on that, what did you take forward to prepare other people that you trained because of that incident?
Yeah, so one of the things that I wish I did more at that time was kind of directionals off the leash. It was one of the things that the ATF had down. It was beautiful to watch because in one of the times where I was taking a break, I got to go see him deploy his dog, and he was primarily taking care of the parking lots. So you had hundreds and hundreds of cars. If people remember, there was a protest happening during that time. So you had thousands of people downtown that could not get to their cars, and every single one of those cars needed to be clear. So you're asking one dog to clear probably somewhere in the midst of 1,500 cars. Um, so one of the things I got to see him do was he's using a whistle and he's directing the dog right and left, right? And I'm thinking, how beneficial is that at this moment? Here I am with a 15-foot line, doing everything with my dog for the most part. I had some control, but not that level of control. And I really wish I did because I think it would help me a lot more in those situations where the dog's not thinking obedience; he's just looking for direction, and he's doing his thing, and he's working those things out, without being on a leash, off leash. So that was one of the things that I definitely picked up on that we started to implore afterwards. Was those directionals off leash is huge. You want to be able to cast your dog for a significant distance if needed be. But I would say this: your environment is always going to dictate your tactics. So what he was doing, it was perfect because that's the setting he needed to do that in. Um, Primarily, what I was asked to do, the 15-foot line, and I had a flexi that was like 30 feet that I had on me as well that I could switch, was perfect for what I needed. I didn't think it really inhibited me in any way. But I still wish that I had that in my back pocket. You and I talked about having different tools, right? That was one of the tools that I was like, I have to get that as part of my arsenal, especially for what we're being asked to do on the bomb side.
And as you kind of say that, it's that bigger picture. I'd rather have it and not need it
Mm.
than need it and not have it. And a lot of skills um, or training methods come from a preference or a specific experience. And until you've experienced something different or go through a deployment that you hadn't ever planned for or expected, you discover some of those gaps. And in that moment, you're like, damn it, I wish I had that, whatever that would be for somebody. The part I wanted to, this is kind of just a tongue in cheek comment, but you brought up something that is always a part of conversation in the detection dog worlds, and that is, does obedience ruin a detection dog?
I would highly, well, I don't typically try to have real opinionated, um, views on a certain thing because I try to listen to people's perspectives when they're super hot and bothered by a certain topic. And I've heard this over and over again. I've never, ever, ever had a situation where a properly trained dog was in conflict because it had a high level of obedience. I don't think that if you're seeing that operationally, I think that's a training issue. I think you should be able to have both. And I've never had an issue with a high level of obedience in my bomb dogs to be able to do everything they needed to do and then still work independently without conflict. I think that's something that we should be striving for. And my guess would be that people tend to make excuses why they want to do something or not do something until you do it operationally or in those environments and you realize how important it is to have obedience in those settings, especially, when there are safety issues, safety concerns. Like, you have to have some level of obedience. Does it have to be a KMVP dog, type of obedience? Probably not. But I don't think, just going over the broad term or question, does obedience kill drive? I don't believe it. I don't. I think you're channeling two different things, and you can easily have. And we have this term that doesn't make sense, but to the dog trainers and handlers, it almost should. We want 100% obedience, right? At the same time, we want 100% drive. And those are the things we're striving for. Yes, those numbers don't add, but we believe we can achieve it, and we strive for that. Every training day.
A lot of those rumors like that, or I would say beliefs like that, get passed around, like you said, for no reason. They're based off of either, in this case, probably bad training was something, or something based off of too much compulsion control aspect, and or the other side would possibly be, well, the dog that whoever saw was a dog that was probably a little too weak to begin with, so even the slightest bit of control looked like, oh, that was a problem. And then our industry just has this inherent ability to pass on information to each other as if it was gospel, and yet, because of, I think, the institutionalized learning system that exists, it prevents or inhibits somebody from questioning that when they're told that. Like, really? That doesn't make any sense. I have a dual purpose dog who's highly trained in obedience and it does detection, yet someone says obedience kills driving a detection dog. How is that actually making sense now? Because of, not only do I have a dog that has obedience, I have to certify with it, so therefore I demonstrate it. And then others who I know have the exact same thing, and I know people probably have even better obedience than I do, and they still have a great detection dog. So it's I asked that because me and you kind of talked before, but I'm on a journey myself, taking a dog and doing high level obedience with it, but it's already a detection dog, a strong detection dog, and I'm also having to learn a whole new way of doing obedience because Michael's the one teaching me.
Yeah.
Of course I could do obedience, but I also wanted to be uncomfortable myself by doing it his way and going through all the nuances that his method that he likes to do has. And it's a lot of mechanical stuff. So anyway, I'm just chronicling that journey for people in the future, that they'll see you can take an old dog like me, teach me some new tricks, but be really uncomfortable, but at the same time demonstrate some different aspects of good obedience, good control that are really applicable to deployments such as what you mentioned. Because I also got to see there was aspects where, man, having a dog where I could collaborate, like you said, from a distance, send it out, have it go left, go right, do something that I need to go do, but it's not safe for me to get that close. So if I could employ my dog to go do something and do it effectively, but still be able to communicate to it if I need to. If I need to stop it right away, if it indicates, get it back to me. All of these things that would become highly useful and important, especially in a deployment situation. So, those watching and listening, I hope they take away that there's a lot of different ways you can build collaboration with your dog that is enjoyable, motivational for the dog, and get a lot out of it for you operationally. And it doesn't do anything but actually enhance your dog's capabilities, not decrease them. So I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, because I think, again, the more we share operational experiences, we can also see better where it connects to training and maybe what doesn't connect to training, and then realize okay, and we all know this. We all know there's certain things that we have to train for a certain certification or a standard, so that way we can go do the job that we want to go do. And some of those things that we're required to go do don't make any sense operationally. It's simply a demonstration of control or the ability to show that we take the appropriate initiative when it comes to something with high liability. So
Yeah.
the so when that deployment was over, you walked away with those lessons learned. What was your next kind of deployment after that, where you were in a situation and you had a takeaway from it?
Well, I've had a couple. The most recent one was probably the most heart wrenching. Was the Allen Outlet Mall shooting. I'm not sure if that made national news, but we had did it? Do
Was
you
that the
remember
one where
hearing
the
that?
guy was in a mail truck for a little while too? Or they thought he was in a mail truck.
No, this one was like in an outlet mall, which is kind of only outdoor. It's almost like it's like a shopping center where, think of it, and it's so bad. All the stores are almost like in the shape of a square on the outside, and everyone parks on the inside. So they're not really connected. It's door to
Mhm.
door, so it's not like your traditional mall. Basically, he comes in. He's got um, a plate, rifle plate on. He's got armor, and he's got his assault rifle, and he starts just murdering people.
Mm.
And I remember I was on duty when that came out. Um, I had to go again, grab my bomb dog, and head in that direction. And those are tough because, I'm a father of two, and to see, you know, a lot of things in law enforcement you see probably don't bother you, but for me, it's always kids. That has
Mhm.
always been my kryptonite.
Same. Kids
It's
and
always
kids and animals.
there. You go. Yeah, asking me to shoot a deer that's stuck in a fence, and I'm gonna have a hard time all day dealing with that. But I digress. We're we're, we're deploying, getting prepped for this deployment, and the guy's already down by the time we're there. There was some talks about a secondary person, but we're able to look at video and kind of slow things down. And then it was just about basically clearing the car that he came in, and then he went into a couple of stores and clearing those stores for IEDs. And it's kind of a flashback from that time in downtown Dallas. And this happened in Allen, Texas, by the way. Um, so I've talked about my failures pretty openly with the guys that I train with. And what's really cool about our group is when we deploy, we typically deploy with each other. So I had dual purpose narcotics patrol handlers with me on this deployment because they see how we deploy in practice, right? All the operational lessons that we've learned. I get to talk to them about it between equipment and what we're looking for, this and that. A lot of those guys find that really interesting, even though they're not bomb dog handlers. They want to be a part of it. They have good questions. So I'm like, hey, who better to have as my backup as guys who train with me every single week, know the expectations, and know what we're looking for and the dangers. So we had a SWAT team that we typically work with anyway. We do a lot of integration with that local SWAT team. So I knew the commander and like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're looking for. Does anybody have any questions? And then there's blood everywhere, right? So now I get an opportunity since then to see how that training translates to operational stuff. So happy to say the dog could care less about the blood. She did a great job of clearing the areas. Um, Always tough to see though. At that time,
Mhm.
I would say the difference between that deployment and the Dallas deployment is I didn't think about anything while I was doing the Dallas deployment. I was just laser focused on just the job at hand. I can tell you when you're on scene and you see a whole family mowed down and you have kids that are killed, that's tough. And I would say this was more of an emotional response that I was having to kind of deal with and get through when seeing all those things.
Mhm.
Clearing his body, that's another one that we didn't even think about with the Dallas one was, does he have an IED on his body? Have you trained for that? Luckily in training since the Dallas thing and lessons learned, we tried to recreate the Aurora shooting that happened in the movie theater.
Mhm.
And anytime that we put something together as a company, we do these operational these scenario based trainings that are based on real life deployments. So if you're a bomb dog handler and you've never been into a movie theater where there's popcorn and everything all over the ground and you're asked to search for explosives, I can promise you it's going to be something that you need to address, especially if you have a lab, because they're little vacuum cleaners at that point. They're eating everything, and they're especially the ones that are food reward, right? Like a lot of the ATF dogs. So, but yeah, that would be the next deployment that I would say that's worth mentioning that we had had similar things that we had to overcome. The environment was different. I kept my dog on a kind of a shorter leash because of all the things that were happening. I cleared very similar to a SWAT operator, clearing just all of the shallow areas first, and then kind of approaching and systematically going through. A lot of communication with my guys on what's been cleared, what's not clear, what are they seeing, looking up, looking down. It was beautiful to be a part of because I had guys who were just as vested in my success as I was. And when they saw potential dangers for the dog, they'd stop and say, "Hey, just so you know, I think this may be an issue and this is why." But we literally followed a blood trail to a location where we were pretty sure, the suspect, or whatever you want to call him, kind of followed that whole area. So there's tons of different types of odors there, and overall, I'm happy with that deployment. I think everything I learned in Dallas really helped that specific deployment. If I had to be critical about myself, and it's something that I try to do, is during the time of the search, my dog decided it was a good time to go potty. Although I asked her, "Hey, this is the time to go. This is the time to go." I was too busy talking to other people, didn't actually see if she went. So here we go again. A minor thing that you do a million times, you don't even think twice about. Typically, we don't even allow the dog to go do anything until it shows us that it goes potty. So it's not part of it's not causing an issue with operational success, right? So I must have missed it because she took a dump in the middle of the store, and now I have to deal with that. I have other guys that don't want to step in it, and it's just an unnecessary thing that I could have avoided if I took my time and went through that mental checklist a little better.
I would even add that even if she took a break and you saw it, situations like real deployments, like you mentioned, bring out stress that we've never put the dog through before. Like you mentioned, that many bodies, or the blood, or the stress from the handler and the other people around, and all of the dogs, as we all know, live their world through their nose. And in an environment like that, could you imagine what they're smelling and the stress that might cause? And I knew from we had, what you just mentioned, there was a dog that in one of the units I worked with, every time right before he would find the suspect, he would take a shit right then, and then it was like, clear a system, boom, now it's time to go fight. And no matter how many breaks you gave him, that was his response. So it showed you that there was a level of stress that was happening, but he was ready to engage. That was like, he's like, okay, know what's happening, here we go. There's a biological factor for that dog, but to what you mentioned there, it's also one of those things you can't train for, which is the bigger picture that I wanted to kind of highlight. You're mentioning some really, really critical things that should be happening in training. Just like you mentioned, the movie theater environment where there's popcorn. We can visually think of these things and know these are realities. We don't enough, I would say, think of those things to incorporate into training. Like, we know them as reality. When we go to the movie theaters, go watch movies ourselves, we can totally vision, oh yeah, there's popcorn all over the floor, there's drinks spilled everywhere, so there's all these different flavors of stuff. And all of a sudden, when it matters, I need my dog to ignore all those things and do the most important job it has, which is keep myself and everybody around us safe by hopefully identifying any potential explosive threat. Um, but training far too often is routine canned training. Let's throw some motors out. Let's run this, without the thinking of, oh, as a bomb dog handler, one of the most common things these days that I will probably get called to go do is to go do a safety search of an area after an active shooter. Every active shooter call that I know, they always employ or bring in bomb dogs to search the area because of lessons of Columbine, where the kids had
Mm-hmm.
tossed the explosive devices everywhere, set the precedent. And then it's been followed up with, like you said, the Aurora shooting and other ones where the San Bernardino ones, where you have these mass shootings with explosives thrown into the mix, or even the presumption of explosives that are in the mix. So therefore, if you're a bomb dog handler in the United States, and actually it could be worldwide, you're going to get called if you have a mass shooting anywhere remotely near you, because they want as many bomb dogs on scene to start making sure these areas are safe to get people in and out of, to make sure we don't have any devices that we've missed, so on and so forth. And in those situations, just like you mentioned, the level of distractions, like you already said, the blood, the bodies. How many have actually decided, other, like I said, other than my military handlers who've definitely done this, um, send your dog up to a body to sniff it to see if there's a device on it. Now, with technology, I would say that is mitigated a little bit. Most of your, I would say at least your bigger cities will probably use a robot device to go
For sure.
check that. But I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of agencies that are mom and pop agencies that are no more than 35, 40 officers, in a big area. And then your biggest agency is a county, but the county is so rural, they lack some of these tools. So again, as a handler, I'd rather, have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I need to be making sure my training is preparing me and my dog for that kind of situation, which these days, as sad as it is probable. So how do you now take your experience, and what do you do in training to help out these handlers prepare for that? Do you go get blood from the local blood bank and pour it over a scene? What have you done from your lessons learned that when you're training with others to prepare them for something like that?
Well, first, I make sure that people recognize that you can't be ready for or expect any operational success without good fundamentals. So I probably do a really bad job on social media showing anything other than my fundamentals, because I love fundamentals. I could probably do a better job of showing other things that we do. Um, but as you know, our dog is a sensor, and that sensor needs to be calibrated. And we deploy a lot. And on Tuesdays, or our training days, I need to make sure that that dog is calibrated for the odors that it's supposed to sniff out. And how do we do that? We isolate each odor and we add distractors, and we talk about some of the issues we may find in real world situations that we might have not prepared for in training. So it's about that, like you said. How are we approaching it? We got blood, animal blood, human blood. We isolated that odor, and we isolated it first, showed that dog that picture that, hey, yes, it's a novel odor. You can ignore it. It's just a distractor. And then taking that extra step by putting it in an operational setting, which sometimes is different for the dog. So doing all that is really important, but it starts with the non-sexy stuff. The fundamentals are really important. I know that boxes kind of get a bad reputation sometimes, but if you stay on boxes, yes, you're not preparing for operational success. But if I'm utilizing that sensor and that biosensor that the dog has, I have to be able to say that that dog has been calibrated. And in that calibration, I've never had a problem with someone saying your fundamentals are too good. I've never had an issue with a dog saying, or a dog acting differently because his fundamentals are really good. Like good fundamentals are going to be essential to every professional athlete. Like any baseball player, any professional shooter is going to be dry shooting a bunch of times. Professional athletes are always going to go through fundamental exercises. So I know trainers that say, I want to get away from boxes as soon as I can. My question to them is, okay, well, how are you isolating odors to introduce novel odors into the environment? Are we starting with just in the environment? If that's how you want to do it, cool. If you're having success there, I'm a data freak, so I love to be able to notate those data points and say, this is what I've introduced to my dog in a controlled environment. This is what I know he perceives that odor to be either a distractor or something he needs to pay attention to. And then when you talk about the world of explosives, things like C4, are you introducing molding clay and things that are similar in composition to that C4 to your dog? And if not, then how are you doing that if you're not isolating that odor somehow, some way? So sorry, I kind of went on a rant there, but
No, you bring up a critical point, and I'm so glad that you did, because obviously you and I connected a lot on on this topic itself, because we're both big fundamental guys. And like you said, whether it be boxes or whether it be the wheel or whether it be a wall, all of those are tools to work on fundamentals. And I was laughing when you were bringing up the sport, the professional athlete aspect. The analogy I make all the time is like, I'm like, okay, I start off with, how many Super Bowls has Tom Brady won?
right.
And then they'll say, oh yeah, 7. And I'll say, okay, so no matter what Super Bowl it was, what was he doing on the field before the game even started? He was taking snaps. He was doing footwork. He was throwing the ball. He was doing all the fundamentals to make sure that he was ready for the biggest game of his life at that time to go do it. And you mentioned another critical point, which is a lot of handlers like to work on, when they set up training, they set it up really as nothing more than an odor recognition test, except they just stick the odors in a normal environment and call it training.
Yeah.
And the bigger point that I know we're both trying to make is, there's your fundamentals where you're able to isolate and work on specific things. And then you have your operational version of your training, which is to prepare you and prep you for various types of operational settings. That's not the environment where we're going to throw out 5 odors or 3 odors or whatever, because that's not in, I have to say this, in most detection disciplines, multiple finds in one session is more rare than making the find, stopping where we're at, depending on what we're doing, and then starting again maybe afterwards. But it's usually find, stop, do something, investigate, render safe, whatever it would be, depending on the discipline. But there are disciplines that do have multiple hides. Regardless of what you do, make sure that your operational training matches that reality. So therefore, it doesn't look different to the dog. But if you just want to run odor, and I love the word that you use, calibrate. I took that from a lot of scientists years ago myself. I loved how, and I took some shit from some guys that have been around a while, like, oh, trying to call it calibration could be a stretch. And I'm like, whatever. It's true in the sense of, if you use an intoxilizer, if you're a cop and you have to do a DUI, what do you have to do the intoxilizer? Well, it's got to be calibrated. Oh, you're going to use laser or radar for speed control. What does it have to be? Calibrated and tested. Just like you said a few seconds ago, dogs are deemed a sensor by definition now, and a lot of the biggest one, OSAC, stating and putting out there, dogs are a sensor. So therefore, okay, how is your sensor calibrated and how is your sensor tested? And we, prior to these definitions and more things coming our way, we just kind of threw it all together and said, this is what we did. And we had documentation and records, and courts supported that. And that's great, but everything evolves. And what you're bringing up is one of those evolutions, which is, okay, breaking down the training into that segment of, here's, initial training, here's maintenance training, and then here's our calibration and our testing. And then there's our operational evaluation and testing. All of those have important roles. And when we muddy them up too much is a lot of times where the issues or confusion from handlers come in, or even for the dogs come in, because things aren't really clear. There's too much overlap, or, it's just dog or human is struggling because the communication or what we're trying to do isn't clear, or it's just so watered down in the sense of, we're just throwing something out to go run it just so we can go down a checklist for, like you said, that weekly training that we're doing, versus going, okay, I call it the P's of training. I might have mentioned it before in another podcast, but I go through these P's. What's my plan? Okay. What's my procedures? And then what's the protocols for if this happens or that happens? And I always write these down before we start. So that way, when we get into it, I'm not just kind of winging it, because yes, I can wing it and do some training, but my training is never nearly as good as it is when I put a plan together and have the objective and try to accomplish whatever that is. And if we have a failure, great, good. Like you said, we're going to learn from that, apply that. And then the next training session, my plan is going to include whatever corrective action I need to do based on that failure. Is it me? Was it the dog? Was it the environment? So on and so forth. So we hit the bomb dog world, but you're in Texas, which is a huge area for narcotics, and you work narcotics dogs. What is a narcotics deployment that was really impactful for you, or had a just like your bomb had a bleed over into your lessons learned? Here's my failure, and I'm now going to remember that and apply it moving forward.
Yeah, so in Texas, there is no shortage of drugs coming over the border, as you can imagine. So we see probably, equal to like California and New Mexico, we see a crap ton of drugs being in all different forms, whether it's hidden compartments in vehicles or luggage or whatnot. Now, most recently, we've kind of pivoted a little bit of our focus and working with the DEA and doing interdiction at the airports, and that's really fun. I never practice for those exact things, and I'll give you kind of an example of what I'm talking about. So when in prepping for being able to deploy for the DEA, we know we're going to sniff a lot of luggages at the airport, obviously. So we'd set up luggage lines and making sure that the dogs are not looking for an orifice to put their nose on or looking for a seam, that, hey, there's going to be odor and it's going to present itself in multiple ways. I feel like we do a good job of hitting that. But when we're knowing that it's going to be the focus of an operation, you want to spend extra time in that and making sure those dots are connecting well for the dogs. Well, just previous to that, because I have a dual purpose dog, do you know who Josh Kirby is? He's a decoy from Texas.
I definitely know of the name. I've seen it and heard of it. I just don't know him personally.
So Josh Kirby, fantastic guy. He left us in Texas and he's in Missouri now. He's the owner of Kirby K9. I mentioned him because he was doing a decoy session with my dog in which he threw a backpack at the dog as it was coming in to bite him. And the dog kind of got upset, bit the backpack for a second, and then re-engaged the decoy, right? This is a distractor for the dog to let him know, hey, I'm your toy, not this, not anything that I have in my hand. You should be targeting me. My dog had a little bit of an issue with it. Well, the next time we went to the airport, he saw a backpack that was like a 1-for-1 replica of the one he just put in his mouth. So what do you think he did? On the tarmac of the airport, where there's a lineup, he went for that one that he remembered he had an opportunity to kind of unload in, and went to town on that backpack. So the DEA guys are looking at me like, is that an alert? I'm like, no, that's just bad training. that's what that is. So we're able to move things around, give them a slightly different picture. But those are the things that, I mean, you would think it's so stupid and small. I didn't even think about that. But as soon as it happened, I'm like, holy crap, I know that my dog is pulling from that experience and making an inference about what he's supposed to do here. And he's a little stressed. He hasn't been in this situation. If you've ever been on the tarmac of an international airport, it's rather loud. There's a lot of things moving, a lot of moving parts. So you could barely hear yourself. That's the other thing is you and I could be 2 feet from each other and can't hear anything we're saying. So, any verbal commands, either he was purposely not listening to me or he actually could not hear me, one or the other. But those are the things that we ended up addressing to make sure he understood, hey, when I'm asking you to sniff something, I'm giving you that sniff command. That mouth has to be closed. You have to be sniffing, and that's what you get rewarded for. You can't be engaging in anything. And it was an easy fix, thank God. But that's kind of funny for me because who would have thought that something that minute would have turned into a small issue?
Oh yeah, I mean, like you said, the joys of cross-discipline training and a bleed over effect. Oh, that's a cool thing for bite work. I'd be happy to do that, not knowing that, there was a bleed over to my detection that came from something like that. So, and I, like you said, there's so many things that we go through as canine handlers that we may pay the man later on for that, like, crazy off the cuff idea that, though that was a good idea for this type of exercise,
Oh
I
yeah.
do have to think big picture and go, okay, what does this also look like or could bleed over into, uh, another part of my dog's toolbox that it has to go work from.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the
to be clear, like I really like the exercise on the dual purpose side of the
Mhm.
dog, making sure that he's targeting what he should be targeting. I wish that I would have spent more time in retrospect making sure he got that clear, because it would have helped in the detection. But because I never really addressed it, and I don't think he did a good enough job that time, that's my fault. That's on me as the handler, saying, you brought up a problem that the dog has in his picture about what his responsibility is in this specific exercise. Because I didn't address it in the dual purpose side, it actually kind of bit me in the butt in the detection side, which is an interesting um, lesson to be learned.
Mhm. Has there been any type of finds that you've had, um, where you were like, "Ooh, that was good. That paid off. My training made a great connection there." Or was there something that you're like, "Wow, I'm so surprised my dog had made that generalization to that so easily or unexpectedly?"
Well, you see, because we're a border state, you see a very unique ways of hiding narcotics in all kinds of vehicles. So what we try to do is we try to emulate those things, right? Because if you're only sniffing seams in a car and a dog doesn't understand that there's opportunity for other places, available odor in other places, sometimes they'll miss those big loads of narcotics in hidden compartments. So, perfect example, if you've never had your dog hit on a catalytic converter hide, it's going to be really difficult for him to do that, he or she to do that in a real life situation, if the dog doesn't even recognize that seam between the cement and the bottom of the car as an area of opportunity for odor. A lot of us don't train that way. I don't know why, but I've seen it in a lot of places that I'm asked to train and help instruct. I see a lot of presentations around seams, which is great, cool. If the dog needs help or he misses a seam, please, by all means, make sure that the dog is sniffing its area of responsibility. But what about that huge seam on the bottom of the car where a lot of odor may still be present for the dog? So of course we got to do it safely, because the cars get hot and the dogs can get burned. But we recognize that, okay, if my dog is smelling that seam and he wants to pursue odor to its source, what else do I need? That's my alert. I don't need to allow my dog all the way to the catalytic converter where it's going to burn itself and have a negative experience. But we train for that so we can articulate, hey, that's why that alert looked different than maybe my other ones, because for safety reasons, I'm not going to allow my dog to go all the way to source. Just like we wouldn't allow sometimes our explosive dogs to go to source and do anything for a prolonged period of time. Once the dog alerts, you probably want to recall the dog for safety reasons and go through your protocols, like you were saying afterwards. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just
Yeah,
one
no,
of the
that's
things that we got to address.
yeah. Well, you brought up a great aspect, which is hide placement. Frequently, and it's, I think a lot of times for drug dog handlers, it comes down to a time issue. We have this much time. Let's just call it a couple hours max, to put out hides, let them aerate appropriately based on the way we're hiding it, which most times means we can't truly hide it like the adversary we're focused on trying to find the narcotics, who's smuggling it on purpose, trying to get it past the cops.
Yep.
So therefore, our training doesn't match those conditions in which the odor is going to be presented to the dog. And like you said, the locations where we can use to teach the dog, hey, this is an area that could be very productive for you to go check, but we've never taught that in training. We've never showed the dog that picture. We're really good about doing those things, like you mentioned, in bite work. We come up with all these ideas, and of course, the joke I make all the time is, half the cops, if you said you could light the decoy on fire and send your dog to go bite them, they would be all over that. They're like, hell yeah, let's try that. But detection does not get those same things. So you bringing up those points from experiences where you have found things in a certain way. I I like you want to share with people, hey, we need to more frequently make sure that we're exposing the dogs to these kinds of environmental conditions, operational conditions, things of that nature, so that way we know, hey, the dog has an opportunity to be successful and locating this. But if we're just putting something in the seam of a car door or a bumper or a headlight, that doesn't really match what we're going to be actually, dealing with.
Hmm.
So, um, again, I just hope those that are listening and watching go, you know what? How can I be more creative and set something up for my dog to experience that might match what I'm going to find? There's, of course, the limitations of, the training aids being out for so long and how we can conceal them. But I really like to get people to think outside the box, literally, in the
Yeah.
sense of how can I present my odor in a way that's challenging for my dog and that might match what I'm expected to find. Um, and to kind of segue from that, you mentioned earlier that you've been doing parts of research, and research is another aspect that helps us become better informed on how to be best prepared. Your research that you've been working on mostly was that study between marijuana and hemp. I know, like you said, it's not published yet, it's close. So just give us what you can as a overall what you've been doing, what we're kind of learning. There's the bigger part that I wish I could go into more, which is the THC part of it, what we've believed. And,
Yeah.
as you already know, I shared an interview between me and Mike Kamisic where we kind of go into that.
Yeah.
Again, waiting for the details of the research. But with all that said, go ahead and fill us in on what you can so far on that.
Yeah. So I have to preface everything I say with yes, the research has not been available to the public yet. It hasn't been made available to the public. So with that being said, yes, I'm limited in what I can say, but here's what I will say. Here's what's fascinating about the research that we've done so far is that we first tackled the question on whether a dog can discriminate between the odors of hemp and marijuana. Hemp being defined as delta 9 THC present in cannabis that's less than 0.3%. That would be hemp, right? Before, federally speaking, all cannabis was marijuana, therefore illegal. So when this hemp bill passed, and it was either 2018 or 2019, I think it was 2018 federally. In Texas, it was 2019. House Bill 1325 is what it was in Texas. And it first drew my attention because marijuana is still illegal in Texas, and as it is in many states. So we wanted to see, just answer that question: can a dog discriminate between the two odors? So we took various dogs from my group, from two groups in Tennessee and one in Georgia, dogs from all ages, different breeds, different exposures to their foundational understanding of what marijuana is, and put them through essentially a case study on whether or not they'll generalize. And if you've never done this yourself, I would say please hold on because the study should be releasing soon. I'm hopeful that it's going to be available before the end of the year. This type of year, it's like, this is one thing I've learned about working with scientists is they're never in a rush. So we've been literally holding on to this research for almost 3 years, but we've continued that research. But here's what I think people should take from it. Here's what I definitely feel comfortable saying, that yes, will be available to the public. So if you want to take it after I kind of hit on it and give your perspective, I'd love to hear your perspective on it. There was a group out of New Jersey who wanted to tackle this question, and the way they did it, because legally speaking, we're talking about delta 9 THC is essentially the difference legally speaking. They took high levels of THC and taught the dogs to alert to high levels of THC, and they thought essentially it'd be like a threshold issue. If the dog was introduced to a high level of THC, similar to currency dogs, you throw in a lot of currency and you say, hey, this is what I want you to alert to. But, maybe small amounts of currency I don't want you to alert to. So we know the dogs can do that. So that form of thinking is not new. The problem is there was no science behind it. What we did find out, and this is in conjunction with FIU and their labs, is that Delta 9 THC, the vapor pressure of that specific odor is so low that the dogs are not picking up. It wouldn't reach what scientists would call their threshold. So by training on, let's say, in this case, I don't know exactly how they did it in New Jersey, but let's say they took a THC pen or cartridge, right? And they put it in a box and said, hey, well, I know from a lab that this has 50% Delta 9 THC, a very, very high amount. So I'm going to teach my dog on this. Because we know that the dogs are not picking up on the Delta 9 THC, it's everything else that the dog is picking up on that they're responding to. So if it's in a plastic or a type of metal, or it's got a fragrance to it, which many of them do have a certain fragrance, that's probably what the dog is picking up on. So yeah, you may see operational success in saying, hey, you see, we put these THC cartridges out there and the dogs are picking it up. The truth is you don't know exactly what the dog is picking up on. And science would point against the fact that it would be Delta 9 THC. So for that, just little tidbit of information should make everybody just kind of pause, wait for the research to come out, look at everything, and then we can have more in-depth conversations about what the dogs pick up when they're successful, which is a clue on discriminating between hemp and marijuana.
That's huge point to bring up, which was we have so many assumptions about what the dogs are smelling with no science backing that up, which is scary in a sense. But up until now, we didn't have scientists that were able to help us. So that was a significant component into why we just believed what we believed. Well, now science is stepping in and there causes a conflict because the science comes in sometimes and says, well, it turns out that isn't truly accurate, or a version of that's accurate. There's also this that you didn't consider, like you just said. I went through that myself. I went through that more than a few times, which is why I think much differently now when it comes to detection and odors and what they do and what's happening, which is like I share the cheat code that dogs do use to learn not only the odor, but context, how we put it out, who put it out, what's it in, all of those things. And like you said just a second ago, in regards to the THC and the vape pen style, and we can make an assumption that it's THC, but in many cases it may turn out to be it's the cartridge, it's the this, it's the that. And we as an industry do have to get a whole lot better about making sure we're doing good protocols, showing that we're proofing all these non-target items, and that yes, the dog is learning and honing in on that. And you brought up the other part is that we also need to make sure that we're reinforcing what we want the dog to find. And we have to be good about making sure that that thing, that particular odorant, is what the dog is honing in on. And that's what the reinforcement's for, not something else that we didn't know that they were paying attention to, which happens all the time.
For sure. And it happens in regular training when you're doing a good job. So when you're trying to do scientific research, you've got to be as precise as possible when you come to these things. This goes back to me isolating odors with the boxes that we use. How could we possibly help understand or get data that's worthy of our attention if we can't isolate those odors and say the dog's responding to this but not this? We can't do that in an operational setting, not at first, because then you've introduced other odors that you don't even you may not even recognize are there. So this is why I'm such a believer in the scientific method of approaching these case studies you're going to do with dogs. You need to be able to isolate these odors. That's the only way you can do it. And remember that these scientists are our best friends. There are the people we're relying on in court for their expertise. So I'm so passionate about that aspect of it. I know you are as well, Cameron, and you were kind of the person who really introduced that to the industry and got a lot of flack because of it. So thanks for doing that, by the way. I'm glad you're getting more flack because now what I do is appreciated. But when you were doing it, it was looked at as kind of taboo. Like, why would you do such a thing?
Yeah, it was there was the because again, I went through the struggle myself. When you bring somebody in with a scientific background, they are able to dissect, and in some cases it feels like they're picking apart what you've done and showing you all these things that you're not paying attention to or that you missed, versus taking that and going, okay, thanks for showing me that, but how do I make it better? We just have, as an industry, the typical response, which is to become defensive and argue against versus embracing a little bit. And there's valid points sometimes to kind of, like you said a second ago, put the brakes on too. Okay, is what the science side is it applicable, or is it just gee whiz helpful? And we have to sometimes weed through that, because a study sample of only 51 dogs, and let's just say out of that, a vast majority were in a laboratory, has some good information, but it may not translate completely. And just like case law, people like to grab a segment of what the case law said or a segment of research says and then hang all the weight on that. I did that too. Now I take a open-eyed approach. Okay, great, super information. I want to know more about it, and then dissect, is it applicable? Okay, this part is, this part is, this part is, and then what may not be totally applicable, but hey, be aware of. Um, and that's again something that we do is it's easy for us to jump on a point, especially if it validates something that we believed. We're
Oh
all
yeah.
about it. We get really passionate about that. When it doesn't validate what we believe, we want to become defensive. And I just urge people like yourself, like you said, let's look at it with an open eye, and what information can I take from this to improve myself as a dog handler and trainer, and what practices can I clean up a little bit, such as, one of the things both you and I cringe at sometimes is wooden boxes, and then hey, let's just throw everything in the wooden box and it's going to work great.
Oh
And
man.
we've evolved a lot since then, so we don't have to use that. Did that technique work? It worked. But when we look at it now, is it nearly as effective and efficient process? No, it lacks a lot of clarity to the dog, even though they'd get themselves through it some way or another. But what we ended up doing a lot of times is we ended up putting a lot more work in than we needed to, had we just made some adjustments of what we were using, how we were using it, maybe some odor hygiene, maybe some material or substrates that were better for making sure my dog wasn't focusing on dog saliva versus the
For
target
sure.
odor and things like that. It's like I learned with Nathan, um, uh, a battery, let's say like a ball launcher. The battery in there has high levels of lithium, and if we're
Hmm.
not careful, some dogs will hone in on, oh, well, if this is there, then that's relevant to me. And it's not same for every dog. Other dogs wouldn't care less, but we can't make the assumption that they're not, and we can't make the assumption that they are. So just like you said a minute ago, this is where our fundamentals and our odor recognition testing help us weed in or weed out some of the things that we don't want, and then hone in on the things that we do want to reinforce a dog for.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned earlier, not enough time is spent on the fundamental stuff. People want to get past that and go do the cool guy stuff. And without always incorporating your fundamentals, we miss out on some of that clarity and efficiency and effectiveness to make us better. So hopefully people listen and they get intrigued by, how can I be better? What can I do to enhance my detection? How can I light my decoy on fire, so to speak, in detection to make sure my dog is clear and prepared for the crazy real world that I might face, and my dog will still be an efficient detection dog tool and tell me if that chemical is there. I'll respond and indicate for you, or at least at a bare minimum, show you really good changes of behavior that I know are predictable and reliable to, that means odor's there. So
Yeah. There's a lot of
definitely.
lessons learned there. I really enjoyed the process. It's everything from, you mentioned wooden boxes, in this study, that's not what we use for obvious reasons. We use high density polyethylene, a delivery system that I think you've seen before, the Court system. So shout out to Sniff Industries and Paul Curtis, who's the owner of that system. There's a reason why we use that, especially for the question of hemp versus marijuana, and
Mhm.
whether a dog can discriminate between the two. His hot boxes have different I guess the hot box would be the box that would deploy the toy at source, has magnets and electricity, and so you have current going through there. So we needed a bunch of these hot boxes to show the dog around odor
Mhm.
that we did not want them to respond to, so they would isolate specifically what is it that I'm getting paid for, right? And we'd have to put a toy in every single one of those boxes and load them up the same way. I mean, those attention to detail is huge because it can skew your
Absolutely.
results significantly. So because it's such a close odor, we felt like this was the best way to go about that process, and we all agreed that okay, we're going to do everything the same. And that's another thing; it's hard to find as trainers that are going to be disciplined enough to do everything the exact same way, so that
So
these
true.
results are actually something you can go to the bank with. And then working with the scientific community. It's not something that as trainers we could have done solely by ourselves. I mean, we could have, but I don't think it gives as much validity in court as it does when you have each and every one of these hemp samples that we tested analyzed by the lab with FIU, with Dr. Furt and Dr. Frank. These people are spearheading that part of our industry. They've done so much for us already. Those are the relationships we need to really cherish, maintain, and continue to work with. The hemp versus marijuana stuff, I really hope that it comes out sooner than later. I could tell you
Mhm.
that as far as dogs are concerned, I kind of hit on, we had about 24 dogs in the initial study. I can tell you, I just got back from Wisconsin a couple months ago. We put 43 dogs who I've never seen, had no idea what their foundation was, have never done anything with these dogs. And in 2 days, we're able to show them, or every single one of those dogs within 2 days, were able to discriminate between the odors of hemp and marijuana. And Dr. Furton was there, Dr. Frank was there, Paul was there, I was there. So we're able to give hope to the industry that there's an answer, but just please be mindful that it has to be done scientifically and it has to be done with all those processes in order. And although it's taken much longer than I'd like, the truth is also having an answer for the industry on how to move forward was important to me. So let's say theoretically the dogs can do it, right? Which kind of I've already alluded to. Now, where are you going to get your hemp samples? Are you going
Mhm.
to go to your local store and get a hemp sample? What hemp samples are you going to use? Is CBD oil the same as hemp flower? Is it the same as hemp seed or hemp rope? Those are questions that were previously answered by the scientists. We couldn't answer that by ourselves. They did
Mhm.
everything in the lab, and then um, you know it was then tested by us on our side, as on the trainer side, whether those results matched up. In other words, they believed that anything processed hemp wise, like any kind of oils, would be something the dog would not respond to. That's exactly what we found. But I didn't know that going into that. But we put it as distractors to see if the dog would respond to. So we know in the study that really, hemp flower is the only thing the dog makes that strong association with, that generalization that we kind of want to break apart. So not only when the study comes out will we have answers to all those questions, but we also teamed up with hemp farms that are law enforcement friendly, that do a third party laboratory analysis that will hold up in court, and giving answers to law enforcement officers when they're ready to tackle this question on a bigger scale. So we're doing everything we can to assist our industry. I think that's always been our main goal. Me personally, and especially in the business, is leave our industry in better hands than we got it. And I think for us, this was a labor of love, and we're super happy with the outcome. More so because we learned so much through that process, and we're gonna have answers for everybody, hopefully sooner than later.
That is so awesome, and I hate cutting it here, but my
Yeah.
battery's about to die.
Oh no, gotta cut
So
it
I'll
then.
add that. But, um, we will share in the show note. First, thank you again for the research that you've done, and thank you for taking your time to share this, and we'll go deeper. We'll bring you back when the research is out so we can actually dive into that and share all the info. Um, I will put all your contact info in the show notes, but
Cool.
thank you so much for taking the time to be on here with me and to answer these questions and have these conversations so that way others can learn.
No, thank you. And just a little tidbit for the future. I think we're going to start tackling the fentanyl question as well. Also
Yes.
with FIU, I'm trying to convince Lauren DeGrief to to team up with me on this. I think there's some questions that are still unanswered that we're ready to test out and see and analyze. So whatever the industry needs, like we all should be taking a holistic look at that and saying, okay, what can we do individually? Because it's not just my company doing this. There are other companies out there. But yeah, thanks for having me on, man. It's always a pleasure. And we follow each other for a while, so it's cool to finally get up and do this. And I hate being on this side of it, but I'm glad I'm glad I was able to give hopefully some information that people could find useful.
Heck yeah, man. Absolutely. And everybody, thank you again for tuning in to K9s Talking Sense, where it's okay to be nosy.